The warmest of greetings to you and welcome to Happily Ever Teaching. In this podcast, we help you enthrall your learners in every subject under the sun using the best teaching method known to science, storytelling. To do this, we feature special guest educators who are passionately keen for your children to become amazing and successful human beings. And in fact, today we are joined by even more of these incredible educators than usual, because we are all here to celebrate the 100th episode of Happily Ever Teaching. I am storyteller Chip Cahoon, and on behalf of everyone here, may I say we are delighted to have you joining us here as we celebrate 100 episodes of these educators so generously sharing off-the-shelf lesson ideas for you to magpie or morph into your own illuminating lesson plans. In fact, our educators are so generous that even though this is kind of a podcast party, many of them are still keen to share with you their favorite lesson ideas in this week's folktale from Colombia. So before we get started, let me just let you know that you can listen to the story by downloading our sister podcast, Fables and Fairy Tales, or search our website, epictales.co.uk, for Basket Babies. There you'll find a video of me telling the story that you can share with your children. And if you sign up as an Epic Educator, you'll also get a copy as an ebook or paperback, as well as the full audiobook for you to download at any time. There are even some tips for telling the story yourself and a whole heap of resources to go with the lesson ideas we're about to discuss, as well as any extra lesson ideas that we didn't have time to fit in this podcast. Right now, though, let's kick off our 100th episode with the two who have been here since the start with this story, Helen and Toria. Folks, thank you so much for being part of this podcast. I've just realized, literally in this moment, that we have here both the oldest and the newest member of our panel.
Oh, we do?
And I mean that in the sense of duration of being with us, rather than because obviously both of you are way younger than me. Helen was literally there on the very first podcast we did before we even came up with the name Happily Ever Teaching, right at the start of the pandemic. That was the very first lockdown we actually recorded in April
2020.
April 2020, yeah.
2 years ago.
Within days of, yeah, you're right, actually. Yes, it's our 2-year anniversary if we go by that, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, that's exciting.
So tell me, Helen, what actually inspired you to join us in the first place? Because you didn't have anything to go on. Like Toria had examples that she could listen to, and we were doing something that had never been done before. So why were you here?
What happened from what I remember, and do correct me if I'm wrong. So I followed you on Facebook, Chip, as a storyteller because I was very interested in your storytelling. I was something that I wish I had more time to do was get better at storytelling. So I followed your Facebook page, and then I think on that Facebook page you put out a sort of appeal for teachers that might like to be involved. You know, as we had this lockdown, might like to be involved in this new project of doing a podcast. And I thought to myself, I'd like to be involved, but there's no way you'd get me doing a podcast. So I messaged you saying, hi, I'd like to help if I can with ideas and things, but I don't think I can do a podcast. And you said, oh, hi, why don't you just give it a go, see how it goes? So then I did, and now it's 2 years later.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It became, during lockdown, it became was it weekly we were doing them?
We were getting them done every single week.
Yeah.
And you know, it was so manic back then. And I had so much, and I still do have enormous respect for all of you folks, especially those of you who were working with us during those first few lockdowns, because you were already doing something like 3 jobs, weren't you? Teaching the key worker children in your classes, the kids who were working at a distance, and putting together lessons for the fact that it could all change around any second and everyone could all be back in your classroom. And you were doing this to help out all of those teachers who may be really struggling with their workload and needing to get some ideas really, really quickly. So how did you do it?
It became, I think it started just before I got really busy in lockdown. You know, that there was that time when teachers didn't really know what we were meant to be doing. And it became quite a comfort to me, actually, having this weekly appointment when I would see other people and chat to you all and just share ideas with other teachers and with yourself and the other storytellers that were on it. And I got to really enjoy it. And then as I got busier, it still became an important part of the lockdown for me. And of course, by sharing my ideas, I was also coming up with ideas to use with my own children. And so it worked out really well. And I'm glad to have been involved for so long.
Have you had any chances then to use the ideas that have come either from yourself with the podcast or from some of the others that you've been magpieing ideas from?
Yes, I have a couple of the stories, quite a few actually now. I think I've used either as one-off lessons or a couple of times I've chosen a story and shared it with the children, and they've learned it and they've learned to love it. So there's a few stories that we've done that my children love. How Anansi won all the stories, they love that one. And Olaf and his goat, I did that one.
Yes.
And that had such a great repetition for the younger children and the way I could get them involved. So there's a few stories that I've used that the children in my class really love, because I still use them now more as one-off stories. After using them for classroom activities, I still tell them occasionally. So yes.
And do you think it helps with their learning as well, as much as their enjoyment in the classroom?
Do you know, I've had children that they just remember from the story. They remember things that maybe, whereas they might not remember other things you'd like them to remember. The things within a story that you want them to remember, they just do, because it's that engagement, isn't it? It's that engagement with them, their imagination, their absolute love of stories. I think you can develop a love of stories in children, then you're going a long way.
Yeah, and if that then launches you into a lesson, I mean, that's what we're all about here, taking that engagement and that passion that they find in the stories, and using it to be the Duracell battery that powers their learning going forward.
You know, they're so powerful for learning, the stories that we've talked about, and many other stories, obviously, but just that way to initially get children absolutely absorbed in what you're talking about, just to get them, if you've got the children absorbed from the beginning, then actually teaching them is a lot more straightforward. That's half the battle, isn't it? Getting the children engaged and absorbed and motivated and completely invested, I think, in their learning.
Going all the way to the other end, not only the other end of the school, but also the other end of the Happily Ever Teaching podcast timeline. Toria, how have you found it joining our panel and being here in our virtual staff room with Helen?
Oh, I've loved it. And I love listening to Helen's ideas, because of course it is, early years. And I love listening to all of that. And then actually translating that into Key Stage 2 and thinking, actually that could work for Key Stage 2 as well. We are not separate entities. We are one and the same. We're all educators. And what I love about the Happily Ever Teaching podcast and being part of it is that I work in a sixth form intake junior school. And actually, we work off a school curriculum. There has to be consistency. And so the stuff that I like doing, where I'm sort of brainstorming lots and lots and lots of different ideas for, say, one story, I don't necessarily get the chance to do lots of that in my day-to-day teaching life. And I love it. I just love it. Being given a story and asked, okay, so how are you going to teach writing? Reading, maths, PSHC, geography, history, science through this. And then initially I'll go, I don't think I can. And then suddenly the ideas ping in. And what I love is the randomization of some of the ideas, and the fact that, Chip, you're lovely, because you never say, well, that's not a great idea.
He does.
You always are very encouraging, even about the most random ideas in the world. You go, oh, yeah, that's a great idea, And I think, oh, really? Would it work? And it's lovely. It's just lovely being given space to be creative, because I think since I started teaching 21 years ago, I have felt at times that governments have somewhat hammered creativity out of us. The creativity, that choice, that ability to just run with things. And actually, that's what I love as an educator. And what I found myself doing in my classroom is that, okay, I can't move very far away from the school curriculum, but I can engage with some of these really creative ideas that we talk about in this, in this virtual staff room.
Well, I hope that what we are able to do through this podcast is sort of bridge between that situation that you just described there, where you're given a set curriculum and set things that you have to cover, to the situation where you are using these stories as the basis of that curriculum. Because if you are in a sixth form entry school and you're trying to have everybody working off the same page, well, how better to do that than with a story where you can then get everybody engaged in something, and they're all going to be talking about it, sharing their own ideas about the characters and things in the playground with their friends, and then using that to have discussions like we have here in your own actual staff rooms, so that you can be creative about linking the various topics that you've got to cover with the story. And I hope that folks who are listening to just how brilliantly you folks do this, and you come up with these fantastic ways of using stories. And the reason I get so enthusiastic about them, Tori, is because I find them absolutely overwhelmingly brilliant. They really, really are. And I think, if I'd been in your schools and you were bringing, all of my learning to me, I would understand so much more than I do right now. And I learned so much from you folks by doing this podcast. So yeah, I really do. Is there anything you yourself, Toria, have created for this podcast, or that you've maybe magpied from Helen or other episodes that you've found has been a help to you in your actual classroom?
Not as yet, but I feel I'm in my infancy with the podcast. I've only done the one, so I haven't actually been given enough time yet to really put it into the classroom. So, ask me in a few months when I'm more of a toddler,
I will do. Maybe when we get to our 200th episode. Dropping in to celebrate this 100th episode of Happily Ever Teaching, we are joined by Rob, who has been with us since, almost since the very beginning, I think. Was it 2020 when you joined us for the first Epic Learning podcast?
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah. So you've been around for a while, and you've been through pretty much every stage of the primary journey as well, having taught Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 1, is that right?
Yeah. I've even done a tiny bit of work with early years as well.
Alongside our fabulous Helen.
Yes. Before I met Helen, I did some work in a nursery around Christmas time.
Oh.
When both of the teachers who normally taught there both went off sick. So I ended up presenting the Christmas production to their parents. And they were, you don't actually know who I am, but here's your children's production.
And it didn't put you off?
No, I was a bit nervous. So a few butterflies, but...
Oh, that's brilliant. And coming in with Rob here is Abby, all the way from Festival Bridge, which, how do you describe Festival Bridge, Abby? Is it kind of like the link between arts and education in the eastern region of the country?
Well, that was nice and succinct. I think I'll leave it to you. But yeah, we are one of 10 national Arts Council funded organisations with the role of connecting education and the world of arts, culture, heritage, creativity. All of those things. And
you're clearly one of the perfect people to be on their team, partly because of the creativity that you have oozing in your veins, but you've also been a teacher for early years as well.
Yeah, so I was a primary teacher for 10 years. I started with year 1, 2, made it all the way down to nursery and stayed there to the end of my time in teaching.
And when you moved to Festival Bridge, what was your motivation, dare I ask?
Oh, crumbs, that's a biggie. It's just a great opportunity. It's the most amazing organisation to work with. And I think, in the words of one of my colleagues, working in the classroom, you're really focused on reaching the group that you have in front of you, whereas this is a more strategic move to try and get great arts and culture to as many young people as you possibly can. So it's scaling up. It's doing it's doing what Rob and Helen and everyone do, but trying and all these wonderful listeners just trying to get the best opportunities that I didn't know were around when I was teaching.
Yeah, and you're providing yet more of those opportunities, as are Rob, Helen and everyone else here, by being on this podcast and sharing all of your fabulous ideas. So I'm slightly nervous about asking this question, but it's our 100th episode, so I feel it's a question that has to be asked. What have you got out of being on this podcast? Have you enjoyed it? Don't all clamour at once.
It's been good to talk to other people around the country about stories. It's been good to dip my toes into podcasting as well, because it's not something I would have imagined that I would do.
Me too.
And to think that me talking to people about stories is available on the internet is a bit like, whoa, wow.
I'd never listened to a podcast before this. Not one.
Really?
Never. Did not enter into that world whatsoever. Didn't have a clue.
And has it opened doors for you? Are you discovering even more now?
Yeah, and I'm definitely realising that this is where a lot of people, a lot of teachers, busy people just turn it on, have a listen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's definitely something that people are doing.
Grand.
I just love it when the stories come through, because I really enjoy reading them with my children, and I get quite excited about what's going to happen. And with this particular story, the giggles. I loved the giggles from my eldest, who's 7, when the sisters transferred the child for a kitten and a dog, and then when the last one was a stick, you should have heard the laughter. they just were really, they thought it was hilarious.
Yeah, no, I think I have to agree. It's one of my favourite stories to tell for specifically that moment. Every single time. What about you, Rob? Do you enjoy being here with us?
Yeah. It's good to get ideas and bounce ideas and use them in the classroom that I hear from other people. And I feel potentially that your writing of this story may have been influenced by me a little bit towards the end. The where are they now?
The jokes.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, I think you guys do rub off on us as well.
I was reading them going, oh, that's really funny. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. That's right up my...
Whereas others like Abby were probably reading it thinking, oh.
No, I think Rob's right. It's the character that comes out, and after spending time with various different members of the Epic Tales team, I think you form those kind of character traits, don't you? You're expecting from one another.
I feel my reputation for my level of humour precedes me somewhat now as well.
Absolutely does. And do you find yourself using these stories and ideas that you put on the podcast? Do you actually use them in your own classroom then, Rob?
Yeah, I've taken the time to come up with them for all of the listeners that we have. It would be crazy not to use them myself as well.
Absolutely.
And not blow my own trumpet, but because I've come up with them, the children that I work with enjoy them as well.
Yes, yeah. Well, we always do say that you folks, as the teachers, are going to know your children way better than anyone else. And so every idea that comes out on this podcast, everything that a storyteller does with your children, it's going to be adapted and work with your children best when it's kind of been through you as the filter. I'm really looking forward to coming and sampling some of the fruit salads that you have concocted following the podcast that we made with Helen. And what story was it? Was that the Persephone one?
Yeah.
Have you done that yet?
Well, we haven't yet. No. I'm doing Greeks next year, so it might be. That'll
be the time to come to Milton Keynes.
Yeah.
Well, without further ado then, let's have a look at what ideas you came up with for this particular story. I'm glad it sounds like you enjoyed it quite a lot, Abby. Do you want to kick us off with the lesson idea you'd like to share for our 100th episode?
Yeah, sure. So I've gone with a theme rather than a subject.
Oh, okay.
So I've gone with the theme of empathy, and I think that, as you said, teachers need to take ownership of whatever ideas we come up with. So can explore this in a particular subject or use it as a starting point for a topic. But with that particular theme of empathy, it just really struck me as a story that you can really talk about kindness and doing things for others, and the importance of recognizing what things that you can do. So for your PSHE, you can really tease that out with young people and just get them to really think about what they do in their day-to-day goings about school, to just be kind to any member of staff, to each other, to their peers, just how they, I think we've had loads of schemes around this kind of thing about just how to use your words to make someone else feel just giving a compliment, saying thank you when someone holds the door open, just really simplistic kind of things that just make the whole school ethos lift.
Yeah.
So yeah, really pulling out empathy as a theme. So I'm going to go in a couple of different directions with this,
Okay.
particularly because the focus of the 100th episode is around foster care fortnight. So really thinking about the narrative around family. So what is it to be a parent, and what is it to be to care for something? So, we've just had Mother's Day, and actually I think that people in PR have really jumped on this to realise that for Mother's Day, actually you're celebrating many a person who takes the mother role.
Yes, yeah.
Whether they're your biological mother or not. And I think actually this could be a really nice activity repeated, around that time, around Mother's Day, where you're thinking about, okay, it might be a sister, it might be a person who's not your biological mother who is the role of your mother, and really exploring that. And some people, just the different dynamics that you have of someone who plays a role of a carer, and with it being foster care fortnight, I think that's really pertinent. That what typifies someone who is a great parent. And what I was thinking of when you introduced the kitten and the puppy and the stick was actually getting the young... Do you remember when Tamagotchis came out and everyone had to then look after their Tamagotchi and not... And all I was thinking of is actually that whole notion of giving the children all a stick during forest schools and saying, right, now don't just leave it on the floor and take care of it. And, how are you going to be a good parent to your stick? And just have fun with it. But really, really talking about, if you care for something, how, you've got to feed it. And this actually does link with safeguarding. You can do some really delicate stuff around safeguarding. And again, going back to knowing the class you've got and knowing the things you've got to take care of, but being able to say, you would make sure they're fed, that they're washed, that they're clean, that they're, all of those things. And as I said, my thoughts around this went off in lots of different directions, and playing on everyone's mind at the moment is the war in Ukraine, and, what it is to be a young person or a parent in that situation. So, lots and lots of random different pathways for this. So I think the thing is, when you are dealing with a theme like empathy, when you want to go into your knowledge and skills, of course, you can pick that up in lots of different subject areas, but actually a brilliant thing to just focus on for early years in Key Stage 1 anyway, just talking around the people that they can trust, the people they care about.
I do really like the idea of giving them something to look after, like a stick. I don't know whether it's an actually done thing, but one of my favourite programmes as a teen was Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and there's an episode of that where these kids who are in high school have to look after an egg and sort of, keep it comfortable, care for its needs, make sure it doesn't, get damaged and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I can certainly see that being a wonderful little project to help kids understand the various aspects of care.
It used to be with a bag of flour. I think now they actually do use something that replicates a child.
And what age is that usually with?
I remember kind of like year 9s, say kind of 14-year-olds. It was not a class I did, but kind of you've got a doll to look after for the week.
But could you see something like that happening in the primary range?
Oh, wouldn't it be lovely? I think it's really nice because it really teaches them to be citizens, and that certainly is, within the Ofsted framework currently, and thinking about what it is to be a citizen of the school, a person who cares for one another, but a part of their own community, a part of their own family. What do you need to do to care? To have empathy for everyone else, and just notice.
If I was doing it with my class, I would potentially I would use a stick or an inanimate object just to keep it as safe as possible, rather than you're a parent, here's a child you've got to look after. So just to kind of remove that a stage and make it, here you've got to look after this stick. Or
I would use the stick too, just because of how that humour in that moment of the story. It's not, you're not getting a kitten, you're not getting a puppy. You can imagine your class just going, oh, I wanted a kitten. And then actually saying to them, no, you've got a stick. So don't lose your stick. what have you got to do?
But you see them taking care of that stick. They take it for walks, and they make sure it gets some activity. It plays with the dog, and I'm sure they make sure it keeps coming back. So yeah, it's all about keeping the care in mind.
Keeps nice and warm by the fire.
Yep.
By the fire, not like Stickman. You have to be careful. No, and it reminds me, often in early years you have a class teddy bear that might go and visit homes, but the parents have the pressure of what are we going to do with teddy bear that's exciting overnight. But actually, I think the children would really run with this and, where did Stick go? What did Stick do? And I think you could... It would be a competition of whether Stick's lost any bark by the end of the week and how well, did they make a bed or a special carry case or anything for it to make sure it was in.
They could maybe decorate it like the little girl does in, is it Toy Story 4, I think, where she gets like a spoon and she turns it into
Forky. It is number 4.
That's right. And you could, it's a very similar kind of idea in terms of like having a stick and wanting to look after it and making sure that it still has fun. But you also mentioned when you first suggested your idea about the sort of philosophical angle or the RE angle.
Yeah, so when I read the story, I've got a theology degree, so the first thing that came to my mind was the story of Moses being sent down the river in a basket, and actually thinking about the characters in that particular story. So if you were going to introduce the story verbally and give the two different versions, what might be interesting is just to pose the philosophical question around, is it okay to put your baby in a basket and send them down the river? Now, I'm hoping that you do the caveat first of, children, do not do this at home with your baby sister, baby brother. We don't want any of that. But actually getting them to talk about, and as I say, coming back to the war in Ukraine currently, and where the young people are studying the evacuations in the world wars. So it's just good to pose the philosophical question and ask the young people, is it ever right as a parent to send your children away? And how difficult a decision it is to make that, thinking my child will be safer, my child will be better cared for, but that really difficult decision of, I won't be able to be with them, but I know that they'll be safer, which is what happens with Moses. His mother puts him in the basket and sends him down the river, and he is picked up by two servant women who don't feature strongly in the story, but obviously the fact that they pick him up is amazing because of the life he goes on to live. And comparatively with the two aunties in your story, their motive for sending the baby away completely, you could really compare those two things.
Very different.
Totally different. Totally different motives for. But you can really explore the philosophy with young people and just say, actually sometimes as a parent that is a crossroads that some people have to come to and say what is the best thing to do. A very difficult discussion to be having, and obviously done with the right age in mind and the right content. So it's a moment in the story where you can really have a basket and then either put physical things or write on paper, what things would you send, either thoughts and emotional things that you can add into the basket or physical things. I would give my child wealth, I would give them food, I would give them health.
You mentioned there, Abby, and I think both of you have hinted at the fact that age needs to be taken into consideration with any activity like this. And is this something that you would see happening down in the sort of 5 to 7 age range, maybe even the 4 to 7 age range? And if so, what adjustments would you maybe make?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think that particularly in early years in Key Stage 1, you're really focusing on the world around them. Making sense of what is around them. So you are talking about their family and the immediacy, because that really is what they're learning about.
Okay.
But because I think definitely from sort of year 2 going into year 3, so sort of 6-7-year-olds, I know with my 2 young boys, they're aware that something's going on in the world. They're hearing bits about it in the news and from other peers who are probably talking about it at school. So to find delicate ways and appropriate ways of actually exploring that in a story, stories are the best way to talk about thoughts and feelings like that. So yeah, I think that is a safe space to talk about your fears, to talk about your concerns, and probably wouldn't go in as much of the philosophical question I just said about, a parent sending you away, because that would actually be really frightening as a thought to pose to really young children. But certainly more around the empathy and the care. I think they're the side of things that I would really focus on. And around, like I said, the Mother's Day, sort of how wonderful it is to have a foster parent, a guardian who does those wonderful things for you and does care for you. And actually focusing on the staff in the school, because many a time they're the role models that those young people do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do say, wow,
yeah,
I have a teacher who cares about me.
I agree wholeheartedly.
Well, we recently covered a story, Rob, which also has the basket motif, and similar to Moses, Romulus and Remus are put into their basket for totally different reasons to what the sisters are doing in this story. And I really like the idea of using a comparison between these sorts of stories to really look at the importance of, or the difference between, objectivity and subjectivity. Because when I recently shared the story of Romulus and Remus with a group of children, one of the things that we talked about at the end was how none of them liked the fact that Romulus and Remus had been sent down the river in a basket. We pointed out that this was done to protect them. It's what their mother did because she thought that they were in danger, just like with Moses. But objectively, it's a very questionable thing to do, because you are basically sending your children sort of into danger.
Yeah.
Either to be consumed by crocodiles or wolves or goodness knows what else. But subjectively, it's the best option you've got. And that can be a really interesting thing to raise with children, I think.
It's an area that if you don't have the comparisons like that, it's trickier to navigate through. So you definitely, if you've got these stories, then it's a really good way of, like you said, addressing it and approaching it.
Yeah.
They've all got different reasons for doing it. Like Abby was just saying as well, stories are safe places. So you can put the children in the place of the adults who've sent the babies away, and kind of, what would you do? Would you do this? Why would you do this? Or why would you not do it? And get them to really empathize as well with the adults who are having to make these decisions.
Yeah. And talk about some of the consequences of not doing it as well.
Yeah.
Just reminds us, doesn't it, that our young people have such messy lives. It's really not clear cut, and it's painful to know that we need to support them in recognising the difficult decisions that do go on around them.
And preparing them for being able to make those decisions themselves.
Yeah, and certainly as early career teachers, I think we are not prepared for the world of safeguarding and all of those things that go beyond the academic. And I think this is a safe space, a nice story to support you in some of those things that we all know a young person, unless they have all of those things catered for, they won't learn.
Absolutely.
They've got to feel safe.
Yeah, in fact, just the other day, I remember, Helen, you suggested an English topic of writing care instructions to pop into the basket with a baby before sending it down the river, which is obviously something the sisters in this story wouldn't do. So being able to refer to those stories, the Moses and Romulus and Remus stories, that could be a fab launch into that lesson too, that English lesson. But if you're spending so much time with this story, you're probably going to want to tick off some of the other boxes that you have to tick off for Ofsted, etc. So you had a core subject idea for us, did you, Rob?
Yes, a science activity. So this is kind of more Key Stage 2 based. I was reading the story and I was like, yeah, good story, I like it. There's lots of ideas kind of half bubbling away. When the prince and the princess, or the king and the queen, got to the house, Marmalade House, and they saw all the different kinds of trees that were there, I was like, ooh, yes, variation, classification and variation of different plants and things like that. So it kind of links to part of the Key Stage 2 science is looking at famous scientists and the impacts that they've had. So I was thinking of Charles Darwin, looking at evolution and how things are different, but also exploring the similarities and the differences between the trees that are there. So there's a chocolate tree, there's a coffee tree, there's bananas, and presumably there's oranges as well if it's marmalade house.
Do you know, I think marmalade bushes don't actually give you marmalade.
What?
I could be wrong about that, but I think they're named for the look and the smell maybe, rather than the fruit that they bear.
I was kind of half wondering about that, because obviously marmalade comes from oranges.
From oranges, yeah.
But it didn't mention oranges there, so I kind of half assumed that there would be an orange orchard as well.
I wish I'd done a bit more research now, so I'd be able to tell you.
But with my class, I would say, well, there are orange trees there because they make marmalade. So look at how...
Or set them the challenge of researching whether a marmalade bush does in fact produce marmalade.
So kind of just set them off with the question, well, they're all trees and plants. So we know that they've got some things that are similar, but how are they different as well? Why are they different? What's caused them to be different? And I would lead on from that with kind of, and we've talked about this, the fact that geography is kind of a science as well. How do you get from the chocolate plant, how do you get the chocolate that we see in the shops? What happens to it?
Yeah.
Which links into the geography with how the products have moved around the country and things like that, but also the processes that they go through to create them. And you could definitely spend a good couple of lessons, a good week, maybe on science of, okay, well, how do we make coffee? And why do we need to make coffee? Especially if you work in a school, that should be very obvious. But chocolate as well, presumably. But
you can actually link that into the is it PSHE in Key Stage 2? They bring in drugs, safe drugs and non-safe drugs. So you can talk about caffeine as a stimulant, and so that links to that part as well. There's a lovely part in the Disney movie Encanto where they're singing, and the child is really, really excited, and the main character says, "And that's why coffee's for grown-ups." And I just love that moment.
Coffee is definitely for grown-ups, not for small children. But kind of exploring,
and chocolate should be too. But there you go.
Well, yeah, the different processes that are used. Could you have a go at making your own coffee? If you're upper Key Stage 2 and you're looking at World War II in a history topic, you could say, well, during the war, supplies couldn't get through as easily. So they had to kind of make their own coffee. What did they make coffee from? What did they make coffee from?
Linking it to right now.
Yeah,
could there be certain things that you might not be able to get hold of? Your classroom's going to smell great, Rob.
Yeah.
It's going to be, this kind of science lab of chocolate over here and coffee.
Yeah.
Great
marmalade
stuff
over there.
Yeah.
And then what happens if you combine all of them?
Yeah.
Chocolate marmalade.
That's a tasty dessert there.
A marmalade mocha. Perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you ever so much for joining us for this episode, folks, because you've literally encapsulated everything that we hope this podcast shares with teachers, both the stuff that can really help their children get and succeed in those standardized assessments at the end of the year, and as you raised, Abby, the really important life skills that are going to help them to become successful in all the other probably more important aspects of their life that we just can't test for. So again, thank you for all you're doing with us here at Happily Ever Teaching, and we hope you come back for many, many more.
Thank you.
It's a real pleasure.
For branching out to us and allowing us to stick around with you for doing all of these.
I think he's trying to slip some puns in there, Abby.
Is he? Oh, it went over my head.
And for this, our 100th episode, we are also joined by the ever delightful Bex, who has also been a stalwart of this podcast since, pretty much near the beginning. Have you enjoyed your time with the Epic Tales podcast team, Bex?
Definitely have. I do really, really enjoy it. It keeps my practice really sharp, and love sharing ideas and magpieing ideas from everyone else as well.
Well, yeah, because you actually do teacher training as part of your role. Is it as part of your role as an SLT or wider than that?
It was part of a teaching program that I was doing about being a great professional and a great teacher. And I was on this course, and the people that were running the teacher training, they were starting off a school-centred initial teacher training, and they just said, "Oh, we like you. Do you want to be involved?" And then I kind of ended up running it. So, and actually, I think it's how I got involved in this, because you went to a school with one of my ex-trainees who then messaged me.
That's right, yes.
So it's meant to be.
Absolutely, yeah. And you clearly have a knack for it. And I thought you were going to say that you liked it because you have kept coming back. And you are crazily experienced, I think, not just in the training teacher side of it, but you have, like Rob, had experience with pretty much every single age group within the school. I'm not going to do that thing where I ask you, whether you have a year group you prefer, but I am going to ask you whether the sort of teaching approach that we recommend through the Epic Tales podcast is one that you would recommend with any year group in particular.
So I think the thing that I've learned, like with my experience in teacher training and also teaching across the school, that actually good teaching is good teaching, and it doesn't matter what year group you're in. The foundations are the same. So I think actually our older children often, you kind of shy away from like stories and picture books with them, but actually they still love it. There's still that real love of being taken to another world, of being able to understand real issues through the lens of a story. So I would use it from reception to year 6, storytelling as an approach.
And is that what you see to be the key benefit then, getting them thinking about and discussing issues that maybe you would struggle to come out with if it was a real world issue?
I think so, because you can tend to shy away from things that are really, really difficult for the children, particularly your younger age groups, so our 4, 5 and 6 year olds. There's some things that happen in the world that you just want to help them to unpick, but actually it's much safer through a story, or even children who are going through really difficult things themselves. Actually, if you can show them a character from a story who's done something similar or been through something similar, and give them hope that they can get through too. So I think that's why I love stories. And that's why I love English as well.
Absolutely. Well, we often find in this podcast that we can cover pretty much every single subject under the sun using a story, but one of your principal loves is English. So I'm going to guess you've probably picked an English topic from this story to share with us.
I have, yes. Surprise, surprise. So I was thinking about how we could use this story across the school, particularly being as we were just talking about, it does deal with some really important issues. It deals with that sense of what a family is, and also it deals with quite a lot of, I guess, there's so many key points within the story where you can explore how the characters are feeling and what's actually going on a bit deeper than just the words that are written. So what I'm thinking that I would do with this story is use it across the school, so from our early years to our year 6, and I'd give each of the kind of year groups a point in the story to explore, and that the outcome, because we know that it's good to have a purpose and an outcome for our work, would be to either create a non-chronological report or a newspaper article. So each of the year groups would create that, but in a very different way, depending on ability of each class in or each phase in your school. And then it would be really, really good as well to have an opportunity to see all the children producing the same thing. So as a school leader, then you can kind of look at the progress of the children across one genre in the school. So lots of helpful things. I love the story. It's one of my, I think I've been doing this over 2 years, and it's one of my favourites. So
I'm trying to think whether you say that every time or not.
No, there was one about a Robin. Well, a shapeshifter one with the character called
Robin Goodfellow, yeah.
Yeah, and the World War one. Those are my two. But this one's in the top 3.
It's in the top 3, is it? Okay.
Yeah,
so is it between Robin and Herbert, or is it just below them?
It's the third of the 3. Yeah,
it's the third of the 3.
Only just, but it's I've forgotten which one it's pushed out, but it's one of my.
And lets everybody know how good those other stories must be.
Yeah. So if you're interested, go back to those as well. So obviously, one of the things that happens quite at the beginning of the story is you have the 3 sisters making wishes, and also you have the gardener family who have made their wish as well. So the first point of the story that I'd want one of the year groups to explore is that whole when their wishes come true. So like, how did they feel? What was going on? How did it change and affect their lives? So I'd probably give that to our younger children because it's quite easy. You would have people coming in and being the characters, doing lots of drama, hot seating the sisters. So that would be my first year group, would have that one.
They're also the year group that I think appreciates good news more. Because as you go up the school, people start to sense that news is usually about the bad things happening in the world. And yeah, we like to have the good news as well, which is coming true.
Yes, where actually they wished for something and it came true. I really, really like that point of the story. And also maybe getting them to think about why the sisters wished for the things they did. So obviously, it gives us a little bit of information in the story, but really drawing that out. I then want to obviously explore the part of the story where we ended up with a kitten and a puppy and a stick as instead of a baby, because I think they're quite interesting. But I think you could split them up into 3. I was thinking our years 1, 2, and 3 would do those, so they could have the story of the puppy being born, the kitten being born, and then the stick. I really thought the stick was. It's a great one, the stick, because you can also link it into like Stickman, which is a Julia Donaldson book. Go and make your own baby sticks. And I just thought there's so much you could do with the stick. And loved the little puns at the end about the stick as well. That was brilliant. So you'd have to I think you'd need to share those with the children so they can make some really good headlines about the stick. That's why I'd give the year 3s the stick, because I think it's got a bit more scope in it. And then obviously we've got them all finding each other again at the end. So that would be the last point that I would pick out in the story, and then get our years 4, 5, and 6 to all explore that part of the story, because obviously there's quite a lot of emotions and feelings. Even though they're a couple who wished for the babies, they ended up spending time with them in the garden. It wouldn't have been the same, obviously, because their role would have changed from parenting them to doing the gardens. And obviously they were still involved in their lives, but that whole, how would you deal with all of that? And maybe if you really, really wanted to challenge your year 6s or your year 5s, they could maybe think about the point of view of the puppy, the stick, and the kitten at the end. So did they like going back to being a more normal puppy, kitten, and stick? Or were they actually a bit sad that they'd been replaced by the human children? So I think the year 6.
I'd hope they weren't replaced. I'd hope that, they became as much the step brothers of the actual children as the real children were to the gardener and his wife, if you see what I mean.
Yes, I hope so too. But it'd just be really interesting to explore the feelings of those characters as the families kind of merge together, I guess. And you'll have a lot of children in our schools who are experiencing similar feelings and emotions. And again, as we said at the beginning, the opportunity through story to say, it's okay if you feel a bit put out that somebody else is joining your family, but you need to learn how to live with them. So I think
I hadn't really thought of that perspective of it. So that's a really good one to explore. I also thought if you wanted a couple of other headline points for your 4s and 5s and 6s to split up between them, there's also the royal visit that is made to the gardener and his wife. That's usually something that gets reported. It's another good news one though. And then of course there are the children going missing, the 2 young men who go up the hill and they don't come back for a week. So that would probably be a headline, wouldn't it?
That would definitely be a headline. And even the finding of the babies in the water. So actually there's loads and loads of points. So pick from those for your different year groups, because there's so many different things that you could report on and get. And I always say this, of get your other staff involved, get your head teacher to maybe be the queen, I'm sure, or a king. I'm sure they'd enjoy that, or the prince or the princess. So there's so many opportunities to explore little parts of the story, and then maybe making a newspaper of a whole school one of the whole journey of the story within print.
Just one quick question then on that topic. How would you share the story in the first place? Would you actually be sharing just the different segments of the story with the group who are going to write about them, or would you share the whole story as a whole school assembly, or what thoughts have you got on that?
I think you could do either. I think you could I really like pausing stories, which if you've ever heard me talk, you'll know. So I might give each group the part of the story up until the bit they're looking at. So for example, the early years children just talk about read them the introduction pages of the story until the three sisters get their wishes and say, right, we're going to pause here, we're going to explore this, and then we're going to read you the rest of the story. And maybe read them all the rest of the story as we publish our newspapers, so they all get the whole thing at the end of the week. So keep them in suspense.
I love this idea, Bex, because it has got a little bit of everything you've brought to the podcast. I mean, definitely the English focus, but the whole school focus, making it a whole school project. The pauses in the story. Yeah, this is a Bex idea through and through. One last question, coming back to just your experience of joining the Epic Podcast team. Have you yourself gone on to use any of these ideas in your own teaching or with your own colleagues?
I have, actually. The one that I remember using the most called The Distant Fire. And we've used it a few times, but once particularly memorable for me was during the pandemic, where we were talking about there's two mountains and they're working together across the mountains, if you don't know the story. And I used that with my class as they were so some were working at home and some were working in school. And I really, really remember that. I have used other ideas at other times, but that's a really special one for me.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear it. Oh, well, thank you again ever so much, Bex, for all you've brought to Happily Ever Teaching. And long may we hear your little giggle and your many pauses.
Yes.
That's all we have time for in this episode, folks. Thank you so much for joining us for this very special episode, and a huge thank you as well for Rai, who doesn't get mentioned enough for all that he does for this podcast. Rai is our editor at Daring and Design, and it's thanks to him that we have got to 100 episodes in only a couple of terms, really. So thank you, Rai. You've been a brilliant star. Now, folks, we'd very much love to hear your thoughts on what you've heard in this podcast, so please do get in touch with us on social media using @TeachHappily, or leave us a review using your favourite podcast app. And if you heard our little insert at the beginning, any reviews you leave at the moment, if you are catching this around about April time, those reviews themselves, just by leaving a review, you are going to be sending a donation to the relief efforts in Ukraine. So just an added incentive there to be leaving us a review right now. And please also share this podcast with your colleagues and help us start a story-led revolution in classrooms around the world, so children everywhere can learn in a way that's effective, memorable, and enjoyable all at the same time, just as you've been hearing happens in the classes of these fine educators we've got here with us right now. Now, we'll be back next week so the gardener and his family can help us plan lessons in science, geography, art, music, design, and technology. But right now, it only remains for us to say cheerio, and we hope to hear your story soon. So,
cheerio!
And we hope to hear your story soon.